When a 5-year-old girl steps onto a city bus with a single envelope, a billionaire's perfectly controlled life fractures. One letter. One choice. As silence, fear, and quiet hope collide, a child asks the question that changes everything: will he stay or walk away forever? Before love rewrites every broken rule, Dorian Vale boarded the Route 550 bus like it was a moving boardroom, quiet, controlled, and perfectly timed. His navy overcoat didn't wrinkle. His leather briefcase didn't swing. Even his footsteps sounded efficient. The city outside the windows was Seattle gray winter light smeared across glass. Dorian didn't look at it. He didn't look at people either. Not in a rude way, just in the way a man learns to move through crowds without becoming part of them. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Chicago. Investors. Final signatures. The kind of meeting that turned months of negotiations into one clean handshake. Dorian slid into a seat halfway down the bus, opened his tablet, and pulled up the documents again. He believed in repetition, in certainty, in eliminating risk. The bus lurched forward. Then something soft brushed his knee. Dorian glanced down. A little girl stood beside him, balancing with one hand on the seatback. She was about 6, with messy blonde hair tucked behind one ear and enormous blue eyes that didn't flinch. A small pink backpack rested on her shoulders, the straps slightly frayed, but neatly fastened. In both hands, she held a white envelope. She didn't look scared. She looked determined. "Excuse me," she said, voice gentle but steady. "Are you Dorian Vale?" Dorian blinked. People recognized him sometimes, but never like this. Never on a bus. Never a child. "Yes," he said carefully. "Who's asking?" The girl lifted the envelope a little higher, like it mattered, like it deserved respect. "My mom asked you to read this," she whispered. "She said you'd know her handwriting." Dorian's chest tightened, an instant unreasonable reaction. He reached for the envelope, and before his fingers even touched it, he saw the name written across the front in looping script. His name. In a handwriting he hadn't seen in 7 years. His breath caught. The bus kept moving. But Dorian Vale didn't. Dorian opened the envelope like it might cut him. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no explanation, no dramatic flourish, just a few lines, written with the same familiar slant that used to leave notes on his kitchen counter. "Dorian. She's your daughter. Her name is Junie. I need help." Sloan. For a second, the words didn't make sense. Not because they were unclear, but because they were too clear, too direct, to fit inside the neat life he'd built. He read them again. Then again. His throat went tight. Tears rose before he could stop them, hot and humiliating. Dorian Vale did not cry in public. He didn't cry anywhere, but now his vision blurred, as if the world itself had tilted. He looked up at the little girl. "What's your name?" he asked, forcing his voice into calm. "Junie Hart," she said. "But my mom said you might call me Junebug." Junebug. That nickname landed like a memory he'd never had the right to earn. "And your mom?" Dorian swallowed. "Where is she, Junie?" Junie pointed forward toward the front half of the bus. "She's here. She just gets tired, so she's sitting." Dorian's eyes followed her small gesture. 2 rows ahead by the window, a woman sat very still, hands folded in her lap, like she was holding herself together. A knit beanie, a scarf. A posture that tried to look normal. Even from behind, he knew her. Sloan Hart. His chest went tight again, different this time. Not shock. Regret. Junie watched his face with serious focus, like she was reading weather. "My mom said you're busy," Junie added softly. "But she also said, you're the kind of person who does the right thing when it matters." Dorian's phone buzzed again with work demands. He didn't look. He couldn't. Because suddenly the most important thing in his world was standing on a moving bus, holding her breath, waiting to see if she would be chosen. Dorian stood and moved down the aisle slowly, careful not to startle anyone, careful not to turn this into a scene. He stopped beside the woman by the window. Sloane looked up. 7 years disappeared in one breath. Her eyes were still green, sharp, intelligent, stubborn. But her face was paler than he remembered, the shadows beneath her eyes too deep for ordinary exhaustion. "Hi," she said, voice steady in a body that looked tired. "Hi," Dorian echoed, and the word felt like stepping into a room he'd kept locked. Junie hovered between them, clutching her backpack strap like it was a handle to courage. Dorian lowered his voice. "I read it." Sloane nodded once. "I know." The bus hummed announcements, crackling overhead, commuters scrolling phones, like nothing world-changing was happening 3 feet away. Dorian's own phone vibrated again, Sarah, his COO, calling. It would be easy to answer, easier even than looking at Sloane's thin hands and admitting he had been absent from a life he never knew existed. Dorian stared at the screen, then he declined the call. Junie's shoulders loosened in a way that told him she'd been bracing for disappointment. Sloane's gaze flickered, surprise, fear, pride, trying to hold itself upright. "You don't have to do this here," she murmured. "I think I do," Dorian said quietly. "If I wait for the perfect moment, I'll hide behind it." Sloane swallowed. "Dorian," he shook his head, gentle but firm. "Tell me what you need." Sloane's breath trembled. "I need help. Real help. The kind that doesn't vanish." Dorian looked at Junie. Her blue eyes, her careful stillness, the way she stood like a tiny adult trying not to take up space. He felt something in his chest shift like a locked door opening. "I'm coming with you," he said. Not as a favor, not as a transaction. As her father. Junie blinked, fast, hope rising like sunlight through clouds. Sloane's lips parted 1,000 words behind her eyes. Dorian offered his hand, steady, respectful. Sloane hesitated. Then she took it. And in that simple, quiet touch on a city bus, Dorian Vale chose a life he couldn't unchoose. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop, brakes hissing softly. Dorian stayed standing, one hand gripping the pole, the other still holding Sloane's lightly, as if afraid the moment might break. Junie stood between them, not clinging, not hiding, just there. Dorian noticed how she positioned herself slightly closer to her mother, but kept her eyes on him too, like she was measuring distance, calculating safety. "Where are you headed?" he asked, voice low. Sloane hesitated. "A clinic near Westlake. I've been putting it off." Dorian didn't ask why. The answer was written in the lines of her face. Junie looked up at him. "Mom gets tired sometimes," she said carefully, as if she didn't want to tell a secret. "But she's okay. She just needs to sit a lot." Dorian felt the words land heavier than any diagnosis. The bus lurched again. Sloane swayed, barely noticeable, but Junie noticed. She lifted her hand, ready to steady her mother. Dorian moved first. Not dramatic, not rushed. He simply shifted his body, blocking the sway, offering support without announcing it. Sloane stiffened out of habit, then slowly exhaled. "Thank you," she whispered. Junie watched this exchange closely. Something in her expression softened, like a question quietly answered. She tugged at Dorian's sleeve. "Do you like stories?" He blinked. "Stories," Junie nodded. "My mom says stories help when people are scared." Dorian glanced at Sloane. She gave a tired smile. "She's not wrong." Junie continued, serious as a promise. "If you want, I can tell you one." Dorian nodded. "I'd like that." Junie smiled, small and careful, but real. Outside the window, the city slid by. Inside the bus, a line was being drawn between the man Dorian had been and the father he was becoming. The bus doors opened with a sigh. Cold air rushed in. Sloane stood slowly. Junie was instantly alert, backpack secured, rabbit tucked under her arm. Dorian stepped down first, turning back automatically. Careful, he said, not commanding, just present. Sloane took his arm. This time she didn't argue. The sidewalk was busy, people rushing, coffee cups steaming, headphones in, life happening loudly while something fragile moved through it. Junie walked close to her mother, but her free hand brushed Dorian's coat once, then stayed there, not gripping, testing. Dorian adjusted his pace without thinking. Junie looked up at him. My mom doesn't like asking for help, she explained like a fact of nature. So I try to help instead. Dorian's jaw tightened. You've been very brave. Junie shrugged. It's easier if you don't think about it too much. That sentence stayed with him. They reached the clinic, small, clean, unassuming. A place that promised answers but never guaranteed comfort. Inside, Junie sat neatly in a chair, swinging her legs. She colored with short, worn pencils, pressing carefully so the tips wouldn't break. Dorian noticed she didn't ask for snacks, didn't ask for toys, didn't ask for anything. Sloane leaned back, eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them, Dorian was watching her, not with judgment, not with pity, with concern. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel trapped, Sloane said quietly. Dorian shook his head. I don't feel trapped. Junie looked up, curious. I feel... Late, Dorian finished. But I'm here. Junie smiled at that just a little, and for the first time since boarding the bus, she relaxed her shoulders. The nurse called Sloane's name. Sloane stood steadying herself against the chair. Junie stood too automatically. The nurse crouched to Junie's level. Sweetheart, you can wait right here with Mr. Vale. There are books and crayons. Junie glanced at her mom. Sloane nodded gently. I'll be right back, Junebug. Junie nodded, but her fingers tightened around her rabbit. Dorian knelt beside her as Sloane disappeared down the hallway. You okay? He asked. Junie nodded once. Then very quietly, I don't like doors that close. Dorian followed her gaze, the clinic hallway, swallowing her mother. I don't either, he admitted, but this one helps people. Junie thought about that. When the doctor finally invited them into the office, Dorian felt the shift before the words were spoken. Calm voices, careful phrasing, serious eyes. This is something we need to address promptly, the doctor said. The good news is there is a clear treatment plan. Dorian's hands curled into fists, then relaxed. He asked questions, practical ones, responsible ones. Outside, Junie sat very still, feet no longer swinging. When Sloane returned to her, Junie searched her face like a map. Is it bad? Junie asked. Sloane knelt, meeting her eye level. I'm sick, but the doctors know how to help me. Junie swallowed. Will you be alone? Sloane looked at Dorian. Dorian stepped forward, crouching beside Junie, voice steady and certain. No, he said. She won't be alone, and neither will you. Junie looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Not because she was scared, because she chose to trust. St. Briar Medical Center rose out of the gray afternoon like a promise made of glass and steel. Inside, everything moved with quiet purpose, soft footsteps, low voices, machines humming like distant insects. Dorian walked slightly behind Sloane, letting her set the pace. Junie stayed close to her mother, backpack still on rabbit tucked under her arm as if it had an official role. At the admission desk, Sloane filled out forms with careful handwriting that slowed when her hand trembled. Junie watched closely. You can sit, Mom, Junie said gently. I'll stand. Dorian's chest tightened. A child shouldn't negotiate gravity for an adult. You both sit, he said calmly, pulling 2 chairs closer. I'll handle the papers. Sloane hesitated, then let go of the clipboard. Junie noticed. Her eyes flicked to Dorian, curious, not grateful, just observant. A nurse led them down a corridor washed in pale light. The walls were lined with framed photographs, mountains, lakes, forests, small reminders that life existed outside illness. Sloane was guided to a room for tests. The nurse smiled at Junie. "You can wait right here with your dad." The word dad hung in the air, tentative. Junie looked at Dorian. He didn't correct it. He didn't rush it either. "I'll be right here," he told Junie. Junie nodded and sat, feet dangling above the floor. She traced circles on the armrest, slow and careful. Minutes stretched. Dorian watched Junie watch the hallway, counting breaths she didn't realize she was holding. He leaned down. "Do you want to hear a story?" Junie's eyes lifted. "A short one," Dorian thought, then spoke quietly. Once there was a lighthouse that thought it was too late to be useful. But one night, a ship needed it more than ever. Junie listened, expression softening. When Sloane returned, pale but composed, Junie was still listening. "Did I miss it?" Sloane asked. Junie shook her head. "No." He waited. And for Dorian, that single word, waited, felt like a beginning. By the time they left the hospital, dusk had settled over the city. Streetlights flickered on reflections stretching across wet pavement. Sloane was scheduled for further tests the next morning. For tonight, the doctors wanted rest, real rest. Dorian raised his hand and flagged a taxi. Junie watched, thoughtful. "We usually take the bus." Dorian nodded. "Tonight, let's make it easier." The ride was quiet, but not heavy. Junie sat in the middle seat, rabbit on her lap, eyes tracking lights outside the window. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To my place," Dorian said, then added gently. "Just for a little while." Junie considered this carefully. "Okay." Sloane closed her eyes briefly, exhaustion pulling at her. Her head tipped slightly, and without thinking, Dorian adjusted his shoulder so she could lean. Junie noticed. She said nothing, but she smiled. When they arrived, Junie craned her neck upward, staring at the tall building. "That's very high." "It is," Dorian agreed, "but we'll be safe." Inside, the elevator doors slid open directly into the apartment. The space was quiet, polished, and unfamiliar, too clean, too still. Junie stopped just inside the doorway. "It's quiet," she whispered. Dorian heard the unspoken empty. "It won't stay that way," he said. Sloane sat carefully on the couch, breathing out. Junie stood near her, uncertain where to put her backpack. Dorian noticed and took it gently. "You can put your things here," he said, pointing to a chair. "This is your space." Junie placed the backpack down like she was testing gravity again. She looked around. There are no drawings. Dorian glanced at the blank walls, the spotless fridge. "Not yet," he said. Junie nodded slowly, absorbing the thought. And somewhere inside the apartment, the silence shifted, no longer lonely, just waiting. Dinner was simple, mac and cheese, warm and familiar. Junie ate politely, thanking Dorian in a way that felt practiced. Sloane rested on the couch, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Afterward, the question of bedtime arrived, quiet but unavoidable. "I'll stay nearby," Sloane said, voice tired. "Junie knows her routine." Dorian nodded, unsure but willing. He found an oversized t-shirt and handed it to Junie. "For tonight." Junie smiled, holding it up. "It's very big. Borrowed," he said. "Not permanent." Junie changed and climbed into the guest bed, rabbit tucked under her chin. The room was large, unfamiliar, but the lamp cast a warm circle of light. Dorian stood awkwardly by the door. "Do you want a story?" Junie hesitated, then nodded. "I can make one up." He sat on the edge of the bed. Junie closed her eyes and began softly. "Once there was a man who lived very high up. He was good at many things, but he didn't know how to take care of kids." Dorian swallowed. "One day," Junie continued, "a little girl showed up. She didn't want to cause trouble. She just wanted to know if she could stay." Junie opened her eyes. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. "Anything," Dorian said. Her voice trembled just a little. "I just want to be sure. I'm not going to get returned." The words landed gently, but they broke something open. Dorian leaned forward, careful, steady. "You're not something to return," he said. "You're my daughter. And you're wanted." Junie's breath hitched. She nodded, eyes closing as relief washed over her. Dorian tucked the blanket around her. "I'm here," he promised. "I'm staying." Junie fell asleep holding that sentence. And for the first time in years, Dorian Vale understood what it meant to choose presence over perfection. Morning arrived quietly, slipping into the apartment without permission. Dorian was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with his phone face down, watching Junie eat cereal. She sat straight feet, not touching the floor spoon, moving carefully, no spills, no noise. Every movement felt measured, like she didn't want to disturb the room. "You don't have to rush," Dorian said gently. Junie looked up, surprised. "I'm not." But she was. Dorian noticed how often she glanced toward the hallway where Sloane slept, checking, measuring, making sure nothing had changed. "Junie," he said, keeping his tone light. "What do you usually do in the mornings?" She thought for a moment. "I wake up. I see if Mom needs anything. If she's tired, I make toast. If she's really tired, I don't talk much." Something tightened in Dorian's chest. "And school?" he asked. Junie shrugged. "I stopped going for a while, just until Mom feels better." Dorian nodded slowly. No judgment. Just information settling where anger might have lived. After breakfast, he pulled out his laptop to check emails. The screen filled with numbers, charts, urgency. Junie leaned closer, curious. "Is that work?" "Yes." "Is it important?" Dorian hesitated, then answered honestly. "It used to be the most important thing." Junie considered that. "Is it still?" He closed the laptop. "No," he said quietly. "Not today. They went out together, nothing dramatic. A walk to a nearby shop. Fresh air. Normal sounds." Dorian kept his pace slow, matching Junie's smaller steps without making a show of it. At the corner, Junie stopped suddenly. "What's wrong?" Dorian asked. Junie pointed to the crosswalk. "My mom always waits for the little green man, even if there are no cars." Dorian smiled. "That's a good rule." They waited. As they walked on, Junie spoke again, voice almost casual. "You're different today. How you're not in a hurry." Dorian felt the truth of that settle into him. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating minutes. He was learning their shape. By midday, Sloane was awake but resting the doctor's instructions, clear, calm fluids, no stress. Dorian followed them exactly. Junie stayed close, drawing at the table. Her focus was intense, tongue pressing lightly against her lip as she filled the page with careful color. After a while, Dorian noticed something unsettling. She hadn't asked for anything. No snacks, no TV, no questions, just quiet presence. "Junie," he said gently, pulling a chair closer. "What do you usually do when you're bored?" Junie blinked. "I don't get bored." Dorian frowned slightly. "Everyone gets bored," she shrugged. "It's easier if you don't." That answer stayed with him. He poured juice and slid the glass toward her. Junie froze. "For me?" she asked. "Yes." She took it carefully, like it might disappear. "Thank you." Dorian watched her drink in small sips, conserving something that didn't need conserving. "Junie," he said softly, "you know you're allowed to ask for things, right?" She looked at him, puzzled. "Like what? Like snacks? Or help? Or attention?" Her shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "My mom says I'm easy." Dorian's chest tightened again. "That doesn't mean you're supposed to be invisible," he said. Junie stared at her drawing. "Being easy helps who?" Dorian didn't ask out loud. Instead, he knelt so they were eye level. "Junie, listen to me. Being kind is good. Being thoughtful is good. But you don't have to earn your place by being quiet." Junie's eyes shimmered, not tears, just feeling. "But if I'm not easy," she whispered, "what if people get tired of me?" The question hit harder than any crisis. Dorian answered slowly, choosing every word. The right people don't get tired of kids being kids. And if someone does, that's not your fault. Junie studied his face, searching for cracks. You won't get tired? She asked. Dorian shook his head. I might get confused. I might mess up. But tired of you, no. Junie nodded like she was filing that promise somewhere safe. Then she did something small but huge. She asked, Can I watch cartoons later? Dorian smiled. Yes, absolutely. And for the first time, Junie asked without apology. That evening, the apartment felt different, no longer borrowed, no longer temporary. Junie watched cartoons curled into one end of the couch, rabbit tucked under her arm. Sloane rested nearby, eyes closed but peaceful. Dorian stood in the kitchen, staring at his reflection in the dark window. He didn't recognize the man looking back. He looked unsure. Later, after Junie brushed her teeth and changed into the oversized t-shirt again, she climbed into bed without being asked. Dorian sat beside her, the lamp casting soft shadows. Can I ask you something? Junie said. Always. She hesitated. Are you good at being a dad? The question caught him off guard. I'm new, he admitted. Very new. Junie nodded. That's okay. Nobody is born knowing. He smiled at that. Your mom taught you that, yes. Silence settled, comfortable but charged. Dorian, Junie whispered. Yes. Do you think you'll leave when things get hard? The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of every time she'd needed an adult to stay. Dorian leaned closer, voice firm but gentle. Things are already hard, and I'm still here. Junie watched him carefully, then nodded. Okay, she said. Then I'll try to believe that. He tucked the blanket around her shoulders. Tomorrow, he added softly, your mom will go back to the hospital for more tests. It might take a while. Junie swallowed. Will you be there? Yes. Both of you? Yes. She closed her eyes, relief loosening her features. As Dorian stood to leave, Junie reached out and caught his sleeve. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For staying today. Dorian froze. He realized then that staying wasn't a single choice. It was a decision made again and again, every morning, every question, every fear. I'll stay tomorrow too, he promised. Junie smiled, already drifting to sleep. Outside, the city lights blinked on one by one. And somewhere deep inside Dorian Vale, a man who had built his life on control prepared himself for the one thing he couldn't calculate. Waiting. The morning of the surgery arrived without drama. No thunder, no ominous signs. Just a quiet sky and a hospital that woke up like it did every other day. Dorian woke before the alarm. Junie was already sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed, rabbit in her lap. Is it today? She asked softly. Yes, he said. Junie nodded. Okay. At the hospital, Sloane looked smaller in the gown, but calmer than Dorian expected. Her eyes were clear, steady. Junie climbed onto the edge of the bed, carefully hugging her mother without pressing too hard. I brought Pip, she said. He's good at waiting. Sloane smiled. I know he is. She kissed Junie's forehead, lingering just a second longer than usual. Not fear and tension. Dorian stood beside them, hands clasped tightly behind his back, like he was holding himself together. When the nurse came with the gurney, the room shifted. This was the line. This was the moment adults pretended was easy. I don't want you to go, Junie whispered. Sloane cupped her daughter's face gently. I'll be gone for a little while. When I come back, I'll be lighter, like I set down something heavy. Junie swallowed hard. Promise, I promise. Dorian knelt in front of Junie. We'll be right here, he said. Every minute. Junie nodded and stepped back, brave in the way only children are brave because they have to be. The doors closed, and then there was nothing to do but wait. The waiting room was full of strangers holding their breath together. Dorian sat with Junie curled against his side, her head tucked under his arm. Time stretched. Hours slid by without shape. Junie drew, stopped, drew again, then stared at the floor. "Are you tired?" Dorian asked. She shook her head. "I'm thinking." About what? Junie hesitated, then whispered. "What if my mom doesn't come back?" Dorian felt the words hit like ice. "She will," he said gently. "But what if she doesn't?" Junie pressed. "Sarah at school said her dad went into a hospital and didn't come home." Dorian tightened his arm around her, grounding her without trapping her. "Junie," he said carefully, "your mom is strong, and she has people who know how to help her. And no matter what happens," he stopped. He chose honesty over comfort. "You won't be alone." Junie looked up, eyes glassy. "You promise?" "I promise," he said. "I don't leave." She nodded, clinging to that sentence like a rope. And then from down the hall, footsteps approached. Too early. A nurse stopped near the desk, speaking quietly to another. Junie heard one word: complication. Her body stiffened. Dorian felt it instantly. Junie's pencil rolled from her fingers. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply went very still. Dorian recognized the look when a child decides panic is too dangerous to feel. He crouched in front of her. "Junie, look at me." Her eyes lifted slowly. They were wide, searching. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. The question shattered him. What? Dorian breathed. Junie's voice trembled. "If I didn't give you the letter, if I didn't make Mom come here, she wouldn't be in there." Dorian's chest burned. "No," he said firmly. "Number, listen to me." She shook her head, tears finally spilling. "I should have waited. I should have been easier." Dorian took her hands, small, cold, shaking. "Junie," he said, voice low but unbreakable, "you did the bravest thing a person can do. You asked for help." Her breathing hitched. "You didn't cause this," he continued. "You saved her. You gave her a chance she didn't have before." Junie stared at him, desperate to believe. "But they said complication," she whispered. "They said they need time," Dorian corrected. "Time doesn't mean bad. It means careful." Junie's shoulders shook. "I don't want to be returned. I don't want to be alone." Dorian pulled her into his chest, holding her fully now. "You are not going anywhere," he said, in voice rough with emotion. "You are my daughter. You are permanent." Junie clutched his coat, sobbing silently. Across the room, Conrad Vale watched. He saw his son not commanding, not efficient, but anchored, present, unmovable. Hours dragged. Junie fell asleep against Dorian, exhausted by fear. Dorian didn't move even when his legs went numb. Conrad sat beside him, voice low. "You're choosing a hard life." Dorian didn't look away from Junie. "I'm choosing the right one." "What if she needs you forever?" Conrad pressed. Dorian's answer was immediate. "Then I'll stay forever." Conrad swallowed. "And the company?" Dorian finally looked up. "I built the company. I can step away. I can rebuild. But if I walk away from her," he stopped, "I become the man I never wanted to be." Conrad said nothing, and then footsteps again. This time steady. The surgeon approached, mask, lowered eyes, tired but calm. Dorian's heart stopped. "The surgery went very well," the doctor said. "We were able to remove the entire tumor. She's stable." Junie woke instantly. "She's okay?" she asked, breathless. "Yes," the doctor smiled. "She's going to recover." Junie gasped and threw her arms around Dorian's neck. "I told you," she cried. "I told you she'd be okay." Dorian laughed through tears he didn't try to hide. Conrad watched the scene, his granddaughter shaking with relief, his son holding her like the world depended on it. And for the first time, Conrad Vale understood what success had never taught him. Sloane woke in recovery to Junie's face hovering carefully above her. "Mom," Junie whispered. "You're back." Sloane smiled weakly. I told you. Junie laughed the sound light and free in a way Dorian hadn't heard before. The doctor explained the results: clean margins, strong prognosis, careful follow-up. Words like hope and future were spoken out loud. Later, when Junie stepped out with a nurse to show her drawings, Sloane reached for Dorian's hand. "You stayed," she said quietly. "I'm still here," he replied. Sloane's eyes filled. "I was afraid to ask you for help." Dorian squeezed her hand gently. "I was afraid to be needed." She smiled sadly. "We were both wrong." He nodded. But Junie wasn't. That night, Junie slept in the chair beside her mother's bed, curled around Pip, breathing evenly. Dorian sat on the other side, watching both of them. Conrad stood near the window. "She's extraordinary," Conrad said softly. Dorian nodded. "She taught me how to love without conditions." Conrad hesitated. "I didn't know how to do that." Dorian looked at him. "It's not too late." Conrad glanced at Junie, then back at his son. "Would she accept me?" Dorian answered honestly. "If you stay." Conrad nodded slowly. "Then I'll stay." Junie stirred in her sleep and murmured, "Don't go." Dorian leaned forward, brushing hair from her face. "I'm here." Junie smiled without waking. And in that quiet hospital room, 3 generations stood in something fragile and rare. Not perfection, not forgiveness, yet, but commitment. Dorian understood something then. Being a father wasn't a moment. It wasn't a signature or a promise spoken once. It was a choice, made again, and again, and again. And for the rest of his life, Dorian Vale intended to keep choosing it. 3 days after the surgery, the hospital room no longer felt like a cliff edge. It felt like a bridge. Sloane sat up with pillows behind her back, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Her voice was still soft, but the softness had changed, less exhausted, more alive. Junie perched on the bed beside her, careful not to bump the IV line, showing her drawings like they were official reports. "This one is you," she announced, pointing to a woman with bright green eyes and a crown made of tiny stars. "And this is Dad. He's tall because he's a skyscraper." Dorian smiled, but his throat tightened at the word Dad. It still startled him. It still felt like a miracle someone trusted him enough to say out loud. Conrad Vale stood near the door holding a paper cup of coffee he didn't drink. He watched Junie as if he was learning a new language. Junie noticed him watching. "Do you want to see my other drawing?" she asked, polite as always. Conrad blinked, caught off guard. If you'd like to show me." Junie nodded solemnly, then pulled out a page with 3 figures holding hands. A tall man, a woman, a little girl in the middle. Above them, she'd drawn a messy sky full of stars. "This is a family," Junie said like she was defining the word. Conrad's eyes shimmered. He looked away quickly, as if emotion was something he could hide with posture. Dorian saw it anyway. Later, when Junie went with a nurse to pick a sticker from the hallway cart, Sloane motioned Dorian closer. "I heard you talking to your father," she said quietly. Dorian sat at the edge of her bed. He came to argue. Sloane's tired smile touched her mouth. And stayed. "He's trying," Dorian admitted. "It's strange seeing him try." Sloane reached for his hand. "People don't change because they're told to. They change because love finally scares them more than pride." Dorian swallowed hard. He had been a man made of schedules and silence. He had convinced himself that love was inefficient, unpredictable, too expensive. Then Junie stepped onto a bus with an envelope, and the cost of staying distant became unbearable. That afternoon, the doctor came in with calm confidence and clear instructions: follow-ups, rest medication, patience. The words sounded clinical, but the meaning was human. She would heal. When they were alone again, Sloane looked at Dorian with eyes that didn't flinch anymore. "I can't pretend I didn't resent you," she said softly. Dorian nodded. "You had the right." I was proud, she continued, voice steady. I told myself I didn't need you. I told myself I could do it alone. You did, Dorian said. You did something heroic. Sloane's eyes filled. But Junie shouldn't have had to be so easy. Dorian felt his jaw tighten. She won't have to be. Not anymore. A quiet settled between them, heavy with truth and possibility. Then Junie burst back into the room, waving a sticker sheet like a victory flag. I picked the star ones, she announced. Because our family is made of stars. Dorian stared at her. Stars. Again and again. Small hands drawing big hope. Sloane smiled, eyes wet. She's right. Dorian leaned down, kissed Junie's hair gently, and whispered, Then we'll live like it. 2 weeks later, Sloane was home, walking slowly, resting, often healing one quiet day at a time. Dorian rearranged his world without making it feel like a sacrifice. His meetings became video calls. His calendar loosened. His office became a laptop on the dining table while Junie drew beside him, humming softly. The apartment changed, too. Not because Dorian bought expensive things, though he could have, but because he began to understand what mattered. A small basket of snacks at Junie's height, a step stool so she could reach the sink without climbing like it was a mountain, a soft nightlight that made the dark feel gentle instead of endless. One Saturday afternoon, while Sloane napped, Junie sat at the kitchen table with her markers spread out like a rainbow. Dorian tried to work. Tried, but his eyes kept drifting toward her, the furrowed brow, the careful color choices, the way she pressed lightly, as if afraid the page would tear. Can I see? He asked after a while. Junie slid the page toward him. It was a drawing of a bus, a small girl holding an envelope, a tall man with a briefcase, and above them a speech bubble from the girl, Please read this. Dorian's chest tightened. That was the day, Junie said quietly. The day what Dorian asked. Junie hesitated, chewing her lip. The day I decided I was going to be brave, she whispered. Dorian set the drawing down carefully. You were brave long before that. Junie shook her head. No. Before that I was just doing what I had to. There it was again, that childhood sentence adults never notice. Dorian lowered himself into the chair across from her. Junie, can I ask you something important? Junie nodded, eyes serious. How long have you been trying not to need anything? Junie's shoulders rose and fell in a small shrug. A long time. She said it like it was normal, like it was weather. Dorian's throat tightened. Why? Junie stared at her markers. Because Mom got tired, and when she got tired I tried to be light. Light. A child trying to weigh less. I didn't want to make her sad, Junie continued. So I didn't ask for snacks. I didn't ask for toys. I didn't ask for new shoes when mine felt squishy. Dorian's breath caught, and when I wanted something, she added, voice softer, I pretended I didn't. Dorian looked at her carefully. What did you want? Junie blinked. The question seemed too big. Then she whispered, I wanted someone to stay. Dorian reached across the table, palm up. Not demanding, not expecting. Junie slid her small hand into his like it belonged there. Dorian spoke slowly, firm enough to hold the world together. Junie, you never have to shrink to be loved. Junie's eyes shimmered. But what if I'm a lot? Dorian smiled gently, eyes stinging. Then I'll be more. Junie stared at him as if trying to see if the promise had cracks. He didn't rush her. He let the silence do the work. Finally, Junie whispered, Okay. And the word sounded like a door opening. The county clerk's office wasn't poetic. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a line of people holding folders and waiting for their names to be called. But Dorian's hands trembled anyway. Junie stood beside him in a neat dress and sneakers she'd picked herself. She held Pip in one hand and Sloane's hand in the other. Sloane looked healthier now, still recovering, but real color in her cheeks. Her eyes clearer, her posture no longer a battle. Conrad Vale stood a few steps behind them, awkward in the way men are when they want to be soft, but don't know how. The clerk slid the paperwork forward. "Mr. Vale, your signature here confirms paternity acknowledgement." Dorian stared at the line. It was only ink, but it felt like a life. He picked up the pen and signed carefully. A slow, deliberate signature, no flourish, no performance. Just commitment. Junie watched with solemn focus. When the clerk stamped the form, the sound echoed in Dorian's chest like a heartbeat. "There," the clerk said with a small smile. "It's official." Junie looked up at Dorian. "Is it forever now?" Dorian knelt so they were eye level, the way he'd learned mattered. He took her hands gently. "Forever," he said. "You're my daughter, forever." Junie blinked fast. "Even if I do something wrong," Dorian's throat tightened. That old fear needing to be easy still lived in her bones. "Especially if you do something wrong," he said firmly. "That's when kids need a dad the most." Junie's face crumpled into a grin, and she launched herself into his arms. Dorian held her tight, eyes closing. He had signed deals worth millions. He had shaken hands that changed industries. None of it had ever felt like this. Sloane wiped at her eyes discreetly. Conrad cleared his throat, staring at the ceiling like the ceiling was safer than emotion. Then Junie pulled back, looked at Conrad, and said, "Do you want to be in our family picture now?" Conrad froze. I don't know how to be in pictures." Junie considered that. "You can just stand. And not be mean." Sloane let out a startled laugh. Dorian's shoulders shook. Conrad's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I can do that." Junie nodded, satisfied like she'd just negotiated peace. Outside the building, the winter air felt cleaner. Dorian took Junie's hand in his. Sloane took Junie's other hand. They walked together, not rushing, not performing, simply moving like a unit. Junie looked up at Dorian. "Dad, yes, Junebug. Can we put my drawing on the fridge again?" Dorian smiled. "Yes." Junie's smile bloomed bright and unguarded. "Then it'll really be home." And Dorian realized the truth he'd been running from for years. Home wasn't where you lived. Home was who you stayed for. The first day Junie went back to school felt bigger than any boardroom presentation Dorian had ever led. She stood in front of the mirror, backpack on, turning side to side. "Is it okay?" she asked. "It's perfect," Dorian said. Not because the backpack was new or pink or dotted with tiny stars, but because Junie was smiling without checking anyone else's face first. At the school gate, Sloane stood beside them, one hand resting lightly on Junie's shoulder. She still tired easily, but her eyes were bright. Junie hesitated at the entrance. Dorian knelt. "I'll be right here after school." Junie searched his face, then nodded. "Okay." She ran off, ran, not walked, carefully, hair bouncing, laughter spilling out of her like it had been waiting years for permission. Sloane exhaled shakily. "I forgot what she looked like when she didn't have to think." Dorian squeezed her hand. "She's learning again." That afternoon, Junie came home talking a mile a minute about her teacher, her desk, a girl named Lila, who shared crayons without asking. They had snacks, Junie said, and I took one, and another one later. Dorian smiled. "Did you ask first?" Junie shook her head, eyes wide. "They said it was okay." That night, Junie fell asleep early, exhausted in the best way. Dorian stood in the kitchen afterward, looking at the refrigerator. Blank. He pulled a magnet from a drawer and waited. Junie padded out in her pajamas, half asleep. "I forgot something." She handed him a drawing. It showed a bus, 3 figures, and stars everywhere. Dorian placed it right in the center of the fridge. "There," he said. "Now it's official." Junie smiled, satisfied. And the apartment, once silent and pristine, finally looked like it belonged to someone who lived, not just existed. Dorian returned to the office once, just once, The glass walls, the quiet authority, the subtle hum of power, it all felt smaller now. Sarah watched him carefully. "You look different," Dorian replied simply. He resigned that afternoon, not dramatically, not angrily, just decisively. At home, Sloane was writing again, children's stories, pages spread across the table. Junie colored beside her, offering opinions. "The dragon shouldn't be scary," Junie said. "He should be lonely first." Sloane smiled. "You're right." Dorian watched them, heart full in a way numbers had never achieved. That evening, Conrad came for dinner. He arrived stiff, left unsure, but he stayed. Junie showed him her room, explained her drawings, corrected him when he called Pip a toy. "He's a helper," she said firmly. Conrad nodded, taking notes in his own way. After dinner, Junie climbed into Dorian's lap with a book. Read. He did voices and all. Conrad watched from across the room, something loosening behind his eyes. Later, when Junie slept, Conrad spoke quietly. "I didn't know how to stay." Dorian nodded. "I didn't either." Conrad hesitated. "I'm learning." Dorian looked at him. "That counts." In the weeks that followed, life settled, not perfect, not effortless, but real. Sloane healed. Junie laughed louder. And Dorian learned that success wasn't being admired from a distance. It was being trusted up close. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, sunlight filled the living room. Junie lay between Dorian and Sloane on the couch. Pip balanced on her chest. "Read the star one," she said sleepily. Dorian opened the book. As he read, Junie's fingers curled into his sleeve, not tight, not afraid. Just there. Sloane watched them, heart full and steady. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, time slowed. When the story ended, Junie murmured, "Dad, yes, Junebug. You didn't miss me, did you?" Dorian swallowed. "I missed you before I knew you." Junie smiled. "That's okay. You found me." She drifted to sleep. Dorian didn't move. He thought about the bus, the envelope, the life he almost didn't choose, and how everything that mattered had arrived quietly, without warning, without permission. Sloane rested her head on his shoulder. "You stayed, I will," he said. "Every day." The fridge hummed softly behind them, Junie's drawing glowing in the afternoon light. A bus, a letter, a choice. Dorian Vale had once believed life was something you controlled. Now he knew better. Life was something you showed up for. Again, and again, and again. And that was how Forever was built. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.